1-3-4. The Monsters Ring, Chapter 12. Return to the Magic Shop. For a sickening instant, Russell was not certain he could catch Eddie, but his powerful arms did the job almost instinctively. Snatching him up in mid-fall, Russell soared into the sky. Eddie was dangling and gasping below him. "Good grief," panted Eddie. "Good job," said Russell. "I'll remember it." Mr. Cranaker stuck his head out the window, craning his neck as he scanned the ground to catch sight of whoever had just been in the room. As Russell expected, it never occurred to his dad to look up. When he had flown far enough from the house, he said to Eddie, "Where do you want me to drop you off?" "Home will be fine," said Eddie weakly. Russell felt a pain at the words, since he wanted nothing more than to go home himself. "You'll have to tell me the way," he said, realizing that he had no idea where Eddie lived. "It's on the west side of town, across the river." They flew over the sparkling silver water, so high above it that they could scarcely hear the sound of the little falls by the old paper mill. Following Eddie's directions, Eddie landed in a vacant lot. "My house is over that way," said Eddie. "I'll walk from here." Russell had no idea which house it was, but he realized that all the houses here were small and shabby. "Well, I guess this is it," said Eddie. "Thanks again for saving me from those guys." "Not a problem," said Russell. "Thanks for getting that envelope for me." He held out his scaly hand. Eddie passed him the envelope. Russell took it delicately between his claws. He tried to slip into his pocket, then he remembered he didn't have one. He tucked it under his arm instead, then held out his hand again. Eddie looked at it for a moment, then put out his own hand to shake. "Well, see you in school," he said. He turned to go, then looked back and said, "Sorry about all that. Well, you know, but we're square now, right?" "We're square," said Russell. Eddie nodded and seemed to relax just a bit. Then he turned and he walked away. Russell watched him go, feeling confident that his troubles with Eddie were finally over. On the other hand, Eddie was the least of his worries now. He took to the sky again, looking for the place where he could think about it without interruption, without danger of being seen. Finally, he landed on the flat, empty roof in the high school, which was ringed by a low wall about 8 inches high. The bonfire had been extinguished, the crowd had vanished, the night was quiet, save for the sound of the rising wind. The silvery light shifted and changed as the moon went in and out of hiding among the clouds. Russell stared at the envelope, almost afraid to open it. He was more and more troubled by the memory of one line of the instructions, "Twist it thrice. No one has dared." Had that been a challenge, as he had believed, or was it a warning? His heart turned cold at the thought. With trembling fingers, he extracted the crumpled paper. Unfolding it was not easy. Claws were not made for this kind of work. But when he finally held it open, the moonlight shining over his shoulders struck another line that he had ignored, one virtually important instruction he hadn't even considered it in his rush to save Eddie from the teenagers. Use with caution, and never on the night of a full moon. He looked over his shoulder. Hanging in the sky above him was the silver circle of the moon, fuller, it now seemed, than it had ever seemed before. Never on the night of a full moon. With a dead thump of certainty, he realized that he had made the ghastliest mistake of his life. 3 twists of a magic ring on the night of the full moon. He was ruined. There was no way out, no way to become plain old Russell Cranaker again. Now that he thought about it, being plain old Russell Cranaker wasn't all that bad. He had a good home and loving parents. He had some friends. He did well in school. He had a teacher he enjoyed. All of it was gone. All gone. Because he had been fool enough to use the ring, and use it to excess, on the night of a full moon. Full moon, they call it. Full moon, they should call it. "I'm the fool," cried Russell, shaking his fist at the sky. "Oh, I wouldn't go that far," replied a tiny but familiar voice. He looked down. The two rats that he had been in the alley were standing on the edge of the low wall. "How'd you get here?" he had cried. "It wasn't easy," said Roxanne. "We've been chasing you all over town." "Why?" "Why?" asked Jerome in astonishment. "How about you did something dumb? No one can believe it." "Oh, stop, Jerome," said Roxanne. "The boy doesn't need you to tell him how foolish he was. He's figured that much out on his own." "Just trying to clarify the situation," muttered Jerome. "If you want to clarify things, tell me how to turn back," growled Russell. "What do we look like?" said Jerome. "Magicians?" "Did you come here just to torment me?" asked Russell bitterly. "No, to advise you," said Roxanne gently. "What's your advice?" asked Russell, trying to keep his temper from erupting again. "That you should get help," said Jerome. "That doesn't take a genius," said Russell, "but where am I going to get it?" "Where'd you get the ring?" countered Roxanne. "At the magic shop, but I already tried to find it again, and you two told me to stop looking for it." "That was before you got yourself into this mess," said Roxanne, "which really took some first-class boneheadery." I like that word, boneheadery, added Jerome with a chuckle. Roxanne poked him in the ribs. "Oh, be quiet, Jerome." Roxanne shook her head. "Think, Russell. What can you do now that you couldn't do the last time you looked for the shop?" Russell considered for a moment. Then the answer hit him. "I can fly," he cried. "Maybe I can spot it from above." He climbed to the edge of the roof and turned back to thank the rats. Shaking, they were nowhere in sight. Shaking his head, Russell stretched his wings and leaped into the night air. For the next hour, he flew back and forth above Kennectech Falls, searching desperately for any sign of the shop. Time and again, he returned to the alley where he had played at being Frankenstein's monster. He would start above the place where Eddie had slipped out on the garbage and try to retrace his route. The first 5 or 6 times he failed, lost the track. Then, just as his despair was deepest, he flew into a patch of fog. When he came out the other side, he saw the street of little shops. At the end of the street, there it was, the magic shop. Russell landed in front of the shop, filled with sense of relief. He glanced stealthily up and down the street. That means like secretively, stealth. You can't be seen. It was deserted. What time was it anyway? His parents must be out of their minds with worry. But what could he do? Walk in and say, "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. It's me, Russell. What happened to my skin? Oh, I made a little mistake with the magic ring I've been messing around with, and I'm going to be a monster from now on. You don't mind, do you?" He realized for good and all that he could not reverse this change. He would never see home and parents again. A sob forced its way through the monster's throat, a sound it had never been formed to make. He pounded on the door. A light went on in the back of the shop. Russell glanced around, afraid his racket would rouse someone else, too. The empty street emboldened him. "Let me in," he shouted, pounding on the door with both fists now. "Let me in." "I'm coming," called a familiar voice, sounding deeply cranky. "I'm coming. Pipe down." Russell peered through the window. The old man who sold him the ring was shuffling toward the door, carrying an old-fashioned candle holder. He wore a ratty-looking bathrobe covered with moons and stars, and tattered carpet slippers that kept sliding off his heels. The door snapped open. "What are you trying to do, raise the dead? There's enough of them up already tonight." The old man paused as his eyes focused on Russell. Quickly, he grabbed the monster's arm and pulled him into the shop. Then he slammed the door behind him. "So it's you," he said, with just a hint of smugness in his voice. "I've been expecting you." "What?" "Oh, come. You hardly struck me as one being careful type. When I sold you the ring, hardly the type to pay attention to, well, vital instructions." Russell, the beast of 1,000 nightmares, looked at the floor in shame. "Well," said Mr. Lives sharply, "what have you come for?" Russell looked up in astonishment. "I want you to help me." Mr. Lives flung up his hands in disgust. "I sold you the ring, didn't I? What more do you want?" I want you to change me back." That's hardly my concern. I included very specific directions with the ring. I even sent a pair of messengers to remind you to read them carefully. The terms were very clear. Never use the ring on the night of the full moon. You can read, can't you? Yes, of course, but. Directions are directions. You follow them or you don't. What you choose to do with the thing once I sell it to you is none of my concern. If you can't be responsible for your actions, you can hardly expect me to be responsible for them. And furthermore, it is highly inconsiderate to come to my shop at this hour and rouse me out of the sound sleep. I work hard all day, and I don't need some fool who can't follow directions coming around in the middle of the night to disturb my rest. Russell knew that if his monster self could cry, he would be crying by now. But he wouldn't be ashamed of it this time. He had been wrong, really wrong. He said the only thing he could think of, "I'm sorry." "Well, in that case," said Mr. Lives, "sit down for a minute, we'll talk." He motioned to a chair. Russell cleared away a top hat and a string of silk scarves and sat down, his wings spread out on either side of the chair. "You cast a nice shadow," said Mr. Lives approvingly. Russell looked around at the peaked and pointed shadow made by his wings. "I'd just as soon get rid of it," he said softly. "I'm well aware of that. Now tell me, how many times have you used the ring?" "3. One twist, then 2, and finally 3. Russell nodded. The old man scratched his chin. "Most people are bright enough to stop at 2. Russell blushed, but it was hidden by his flame-red cheeks. "And on the night of a full moon," Mr. Alive shook his head and sighed. "Well," he said at last, "you'll have to stay in that shape for a while." Russell looked up with sudden hope. "A while?" Mr. Alive nodded. "With a ring like that, there's no way the counterspell could take effect on the night of the full moon. She has powers of her own, you know. But things may be different tomorrow. Time has a way of doing that." "Of doing what?" "Of changing things," said the old man. "Of course, not all change is for the better." He shrugged. "You'll have to wait and see. Now, if you'd like to spend the rest of the night here, you can sleep in that chair." "Thank you," said Russell. He hesitated, then said, "Do you have a phone I can use?" The old man looked at him in astonishment. "What kind of place do you think this is?" he demanded indignantly. "But I need to call my parents. What am I going to tell them?" "Tell them anything you want. I can't solve all your problems for you." He paused and added, "And don't come running back to me if there are any after effects either." Russell looked up, about to ask what he meant, but the man had turned and was heading toward the curtain that covered the door behind the counter. Russell sighed and leaned back in the chair. He would deal with all that when it came to it. Right now, he only wanted to sleep.